Let's get into it. I'm glad to be joined again on Bad Faith Podcast by David Dayen. He is the executive editor at the American Prospect. Welcome back to Bad Faith.
Thanks for having me, Brie.
All right. So we are recording on Tuesday, the 30th, which is the deadline for the federal government shutdown. This has been sort of in the upcoming perspective mirror for months now, and it feels like one of the few opportunities in a Trump administration for the Democratic Party to have some leverage. And perhaps unsurprisingly to folks who listen to this podcast and are very aware of my skepticism about the resistance capacity of the Democratic Party, there have already been signs that they don't have quite the fight in them that one might expect them to have in this moment, with Chuck Schumer having signaled, as you wrote in a piece yesterday in the American Prospect, that he was willing to negotiate an extension to the shutdown in exchange for some enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies, and backed off of that after he got some pushback, I presume, from people in his own party who said, no, you can't negotiate away your leverage in this moment for something so meager in light of the enormous cuts to the federal government that Donald Trump and DOGE have enacted over the course of the year so far. So where do we stand right now, David?
Well, we're going to shut down the government. I mean, I think that it's very clear. There were talks on Monday that yielded nothing, and we're going to head into a shutdown. The last time there was a shutdown with Donald Trump as president, it lasted 35 days. It was the longest in American history. I see no reason why this wouldn't last at least that long, if not longer, because the two sides are at complete cross purposes with one another. And as you mentioned, the moment that Chuck Schumer even attempted to come up with, what would probably be a way to lay down and die, he was pushed back so vociferously that he renounced it within an hour. So, I think that Schumer knows that he's in really poor stead with not just the Democratic rank and file, but with, people in his own caucus. And so he's in a terrible, difficult spot. And so's the country, because, the reality is that we've pretty much been in a government shutdown for several months. Hundreds of billions of dollars has gone unspent that was appropriated by Congress. It simply was not given to the programs and agencies that were supposed to get it. 12% of the federal workforce has been fired. None of these things are technically legal, although with this Supreme Court, I don't even know what legal is anymore with respect to the congressional power of the purse. And so we're in this weird moment where Republicans are trying to get a resolution on a budget that they have no intention of honoring. And I don't really know how you work with that if you're the opposition party.
Okay, so there's a lot in there that's really important. What I want to pick up on first is that it seems like the present posture of the Republican Party, which is that they've defined the Trump administration thus far by having what you described as a constructive government shutdown. They have challenged Congress as having the power of the purse, usurped authority for the president, including via this most recent Supreme Court ruling that we should get into as well, to say that the government, that the president basically has the power to block appropriations that Congress has made.
Yeah.
So that there's been this constructive shutdown that the Supreme Court has basically allowed Donald Trump to usurp the power of Congress to appropriate funds. And that all of that means that the typical argument that you get from Democrats against pursuing a shutdown is sort of obviated. And that typical argument is Republicans want the government to shut down anyway. Democrats want checks to go out and for the government to work. And so if you threaten to shut down the government as a Democrat, you're basically already giving Republicans what they want to do. Now we're in a position where, well, the government has free reign, it seems. The Trump administration has free reign to do what they want to do. They've already shut down the government. So what is there to lose, really, from Democrats saying, fine, we're not going to allow you to continue to fund your priorities, like ICE, for instance, or in the first Trump term, building a wall. He shut down the government over appropriations for the wall at the southern border. If you're going to do it, you're going to have to shut the whole thing down, including the bad things that the government is doing right now. Is that about right?
Yeah, and I think what you're describing very acutely is the difference between March and today. So in March, it was the Democrats making exactly the argument that you were making. Chuck Schumer said, look, this is what Trump wants. He wants to shut down the government. It would be painful. And let's just allow the appropriations to go through. And he did that in March with no conditions, no strings. Democrats didn't get anything out of that deal. And he sat there and watched as $410 billion, something like half of the non-defense discretionary budget, has been withheld. That's according to calculations made by the Senate and House Appropriations Committee, the Democratic staff of those committees. And so I do think that at that point, Schumer, certainly prodded by his base and his caucus, said, well, what's the point here? Why are we standing on this ceremony of appropriations of a budget when there's no actual budget? It doesn't exist anymore. What are we actually talking about here? Donald Trump, by executive fiat, is deciding what he wants to spend and what he doesn't want to spend. That is the textbook definition of what happens in a government shutdown, when so-called essential services are maintained and so-called non-essential services are furloughed. So what are we even doing here? And so I think that was the impetus. The problem that I see is then we've gotten into sort of a narrative / rhetorical situation where Democrats have decided to, at least in public, make this all about healthcare. And that confuses the real issue, which is we are in the midst of a government shutdown that needs to stop.
So help us understand what the Democratic sort of messaging strategy has been so far. When you say they've been making it all about healthcare, what have they been saying?
Yeah, and let's be clear that it's a messaging strategy, because as I will say later, all of these things about protecting the actual budget deal that gets made are actually in the Democratic counterauthor. They're just not talking about it. So, but what are they talking about? Well, I mean, it is the case that at the end of this year, enhanced subsidies for the Affordable Care Act will expire. And if they do expire, it will create, on average, a 75% increase in the health insurance premiums that people on the exchanges pay. That's on average, 75%. The expectation by the Congressional Budget Office is that will lead to 4 million people not being able to afford health care or health insurance and basically going off the rolls. In addition, there were the Medicaid cuts that were in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and that will lead to, over time, another 10 million people losing their health insurance coverage. And so there is this sort of health insurance cliff that is going on right now. And Democrats have decided to take that and say, hey, you're Republicans, you created this problem by not extending these subsidies, by cutting Medicaid, and you need to fix that. And that's our precondition for a deal. So that's in public, the nature of the argument, the nature of the debate. In private, in the actual budget counteroffer that the Democrats have put forward, they've said you can't rescind any spending that's in this budget deal. You have to restore some of the spending that you've already rescinded, like public media spending. And you can't impound money and basically withhold money that you say you're just not going to spend. And in addition, spending from this budget year, the fiscal year 2025, we're going to extend the timeline so that you'll have more time to get that money out, but it doesn't just vanish at the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. So there are these guardrails that are in the Democratic counteroffer that represent the real debate that is going on, that how can you have this discussion with Donald Trump about what is going to be in a budget if he's not going to honor the deal? But that's all being done sort of at the level of subtext. And at the level of text, it's just about healthcare.
Why is that? What do you think is going on there?
I think that Democrats do not trust the public to understand an argument that is, somewhat about process, that's about congressional prerogatives and the power of the purse and these kind of larger issues. I think they're wrong about that. And in fact, we got a poll on the same day as the shutdown on September 30th by Blueprint, which is a center-left pollster, that gave the public two different arguments of here's why the government's shutting down. And one is all about healthcare, and the other is about these democracy issues, about the power of the purse and things like that. And the government, or the public, the voters, the people in the poll, said Republicans are responsible for this shutdown in the same numbers, whether they were talking about healthcare or whether they were talking about these democracy issues. Now, keep in mind, that's true even though Democrats have done no messaging whatsoever on those larger power of the purse democracy issues. But the public still resonates with that argument at the same level as what is supposed to be the killer argument, which is healthcare.
Yeah, it's a weird posture, I feel like, for me to be saying, well, stop talking about healthcare, talk about something else, given that I feel like the left has been sort of, tearing out our hair ever since the Bernie days about the fact that healthcare is such a priority for Americans, but is never spoken about. It is interesting, though, as I'm watching the counter arguments coming from conservatives, it does seem like they understand there's some vulnerability there because they are very much responding with their own attack on healthcare, which is that Democrats want to give free healthcare to immigrants, not Americans, et cetera.
Which is a distortion. It's a lie. It's just, illegal, undocumented immigrants cannot sign up for Medicaid. They're just Democrats are asking to restore Medicaid cuts. This is a farce of a
look. You don't have to sell me or I think anybody listening, but I did see this clip of Hakeem Jeffries on CNBC being confronted with this argument. I want to play it for you and get your read on how you think this counter argument from conservatives is going over.
You do want to provide health care to illegal immigrants that are here right now.
That's a Republican talking point, and it's shameful that you would continue. Of course not. I just said repeatedly that it is not. And we made that clear in the Oval Office to President Trump and to Republican leaders. We've made that clear repeatedly. It's a Republican talking point. In fact, I'm being gentle. It's a lie. We are fighting for the health care of the American people. And what we need to do is to address the Republican health care crisis.
It seems like we live in a world where it sort of doesn't matter if it's true. I mean, Republicans just keep repeating things like this. Yeah. And it seems to gain some traction, especially when, Hakeem Jeffries, he tweets this out from his own account as though he's done a real 1-2 TKO punch here. And this is an appearance that he's bragging about. But he comes across to me, someone who agrees with him, obviously, on this issue, as anemic. And frankly, has me wanting to Google, well, to what extent is there truth in this? Because of the confidence with which the journalist, in quotation marks, is advancing this narrative.
Right. Yeah. I mean, here's what I would say. Regardless of what you think about Hakeem Jeffries as a performer, as a political performer, which, I think leaves something to be desired, shutdown events and big events like this are attention-grabbing events. They bring in people who are not paying attention day to day, who do not know that the president of the United States has withheld spending that was appropriated by Congress and has been doing so for months. They do not know that 12% of the federal workforce has been fired. They do not know that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is supposed to be looking out for people's financial transactions, has been effectively made impotent, has been people go to work and do nothing all day. They don't know this, and they could be told this. In these attention-grabbing moments, you have an opportunity to set the record straight and tell the truth. And you can do one of two things with that. You could do the thing that you've poll tested and think is the thing that Americans side with Democrats about the most, which is health care. Or you could actually have your argument fit what is happening. What is happening right now is that Republicans want a budget agreement. And you can say they've not honored any budget agreement that we've put together over the last 9 months. Doesn't that seem to fit better than trying to shoehorn this healthcare thing? As much as I agree with you, Bri, that healthcare is a seriously important thing for our country, at some point you want to have it fit. You want to have it make sense. And I feel like we're having this argument in the ether where we're not dealing with the real issues.
Yeah, and to your point about the not having no confidence that the Republicans are going to honor their side of the budget, I just want to unpack that a little bit because you do it so nicely in your article. The idea is that even if Democrats were to agree to some sort of compromise where Republicans promise to fund X, Y, and Z, that there's no trust, there's no guarantee that the sort of DOGE government that we have isn't going to lie and undermine that commitment. I mean, you write about a Republican Congress member basically saying as much in your piece, right?
Right.
Admitting as much.
This guy, Steve Womack, who's a senior appropriator, basically says exactly that. Like, why would any Democrat step into this and say, okay, let's make a deal, when Russel Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, is sitting there licking his chops, ready to just cancel whatever is in this budget agreement? And I feel like that's an easy thing for the public to understand. That's why even in this poll that I was talking about, when people have not essentially heard this at all, they said, oh, yeah, that makes sense to me. That made sense at the same level as the healthcare thing. So I just feel like it makes more sense. And the other part of this is there's sort of a crass political part to this, which is Republicans are in a lot of trouble on this healthcare stuff. If they let the ACA go over the cliff and premiums do rise by 75%, who do you think is going to get blamed for that? It's going to be the Republicans who just, made all these changes to health care in their big reconciliation bill. And so there have been Republicans who have been speaking up about this and saying, we need to fix this. Forget about the budget. We need to actually fix this because we're going to pay dearly in the midterms for the consequences of our actions. So in my view, Republicans need this. And if you think about this trade, you're trading a budget deal, which Republicans want, for healthcare subsidies, which Republicans need. So what did Democrats get politically out of that? Now, obviously, we want to save people from having this terrible crisis happen in their healthcare. And we should do that. And we should do that separately from the budget, which Republicans are already talking about. But the idea that you're going to do it in the context of this trade, when it can be, when also that trade can be just reneged upon, right. It makes no sense to me.
Right. I mean, the logic of who gets blamed for a shutdown, people weaponize it very conveniently, right? Everyone's circulating these clips of Donald Trump and I think also J.D. Vance saying, J.D.'s clip is I think from a year ago during the Biden administration, and Trump's I think was maybe even from the Obama era. It was a very old clip saying, the president's going to get blamed for the shutdown. Whoever's in charge gets blamed for the shutdown. Now, conveniently, they're making different kinds of arguments when it's advantageous to them. But to the extent that there is some ambiguity when a Democrat does it, because they're sort of straddling the line between, yes, I want to maintain the status quo. I want the checks to still go out. I want people to still get their Social Security checks. But I also want more. The Republicans' posture here is, I want to cut everything and under both circumstances, whether or not we pass a budget or we don't pass a budget, you're still not going to get these basic provisions because we are in the DOGE era. And I want to, you mentioned Russel Vought, who is the OMB director, and he was during the first Trump term as well, because he really is the supervillain behind this that I don't know has been foregrounded sufficiently. There was a piece in the New York Times by Coral Davenport yesterday that gave me my first real introduction to who this man is. and what his agenda has been, that he is someone who sort of learned the lessons from the first Trump term, very much has been plotting during the Biden era at this apparently like rat-infested think tank. Yeah. There are all these colorful details about how you could hear the creatures in the wall, but he was assiduously working through it to help inform Project 2025 and make sure that the kinds of cuts that were made during Trump's second term could not easily be undone the way Biden was able to undo some of the cuts during his first term. And I just want to read a little bit from this article to give folks a sense of the scale of what he's already achieved. Davenport writes, this summer, Vought pressured lawmakers to enact his plan to cancel $9 billion for foreign aid and public broadcasting that they had previously approved, an unusual bow by Congress to the White House. The new law claimed another prize for conservatives, the death of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and a deal Mr. Vought cut with House Republicans helped secure the passage of Mr. Trump's domestic policy law that slashed spending on Medicaid and food stamps. He has spearheaded a push to erase hundreds of regulations on the environment, health, transportation, and food and worker safety, telling Mr. Trump at an August cabinet meeting that his efforts had led to 245 deregulatory initiatives this year. He has asserted White House power over independent agencies like the Federal Reserve, championed an executive order that forced them to submit their regulatory actions to his office for approval. The Federal Reserve famously is supposed to be independent.
Yeah.
As the acting head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the agency charged with enforcing rules to protect people from predatory financial practices, he halted nearly all the agency's work and sought to fire 90% of its staff. At the heart of Mr. Vought's plan, associates say, is the intentional engineering of a legal battle over Congress's power to decide how government money is spent, potentially creating a new legal precedent for the president to block spending on any programs and policies he disliked. Yeah. And that legal battle, correct me if I'm wrong, seems to have been sort of executed to fruition with this case. Yeah. The Supreme Court handed down, last Friday, that basically was a huge blow to the separation of powers that allows Trump to have this authority to basically block all spending unless Congress then comes back and votes to basically overrule Donald Trump. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. So let's talk about that lawsuit and then let's talk about Russel Vought. So first, this lawsuit, the administration has been positing this very strange idea called a pocket rescission. The thing about a rescission is the normal process is the government, the White House can say, I want to rescind this money. And then Congress has to say up or down, we vote yes, you can rescind it or not. What they did back in July is that they voted to rescind certain amounts of foreign aid and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding. What the White House then did is say, well, the timeline is you have 45 days, Congress, in order to vote up or down on my rescinding. But if we send you a message before 45 days are up, basically within 45 days of the end of the fiscal year, then it doesn't matter what Congress says, because if they don't act, then that money just vanishes because we haven't spent it and we're allowed to not spend it for that 45 days. It's like this weird trick. I mean, I don't even know what to compare it to, but it's a gimmick. It's saying that if I do the rescission late enough, then I don't even need congressional approval for it. And the Supreme Court basically said, all right. Well, I mean, they didn't definitively say a pocket rescission was okay, but what they said was, actually, the people who sued in this case didn't have standing to sue, and somebody else has to sue in order to get this resolved. And meantime, we're out of time anyway. And so the Supreme Court basically just ran out the clock. So that's what that's about. But it has powerful implications, right? Because what it means is that any spending that Congress does, as long as the president decides not to spend it at the end of the fiscal year, then it vanishes. It goes away. This is a line item veto, effectively, which was ruled unconstitutional by a previous Supreme Court. But this is now brought back, and it basically says the president can dictate whether he wants to approve and allow spending that he likes and deny spending that he doesn't like. And that is a major change to our system of government. The Congress, which is Article 1, it's the first thing mentioned, it's supposed to be the most powerful, has the power of the purse, which is a tremendous power that can, dictate what happens in the government. And it's been taken away effectively. I mean, there hasn't been a formal ruling or a final ruling, but in practice, it's been taken away. And this has been Russ Vought's dream for the last 4 years. As you say, he's been plotting to come up with this kind of idea whereby the executive has the full power for federal spending. And let me just say, he's done that regardless of the fact that there's been a government shutdown or not. So now Vought is out there threatening, oh, well, if you do a government shutdown, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut spending and fire workers. And my answer to that is, you're already cutting spending and firing workers. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and to your point in your piece, what was it, like 30,000 federal workers have come together to sign this petition that says we're willing to go to the mat on this. Go ahead and shut the government down. Like don't make some silly compromise on our behalf, because we can see where this leads.
Yeah,
we can see that there's no end point, and we'd rather fight the main battle now than win a tiny, or the main war now rather than win a tiny battle and ultimately just be slowly drained to death with the cuts that have been happening in the due course of what the Trump administration's priorities are.
Right. And, federal workers are kind of closest to this situation, I feel. And I've heard from several of them today that said, you're absolutely right. And this is exactly how you have to think about this. The government has already been shut down. Congress needs to take a stand for their own priorities, for their own institution, for their own relevancy, and come up with a solution that prevents this willy-nilly elimination and withholding of funding and, playing with federal workers' lives.
Are there any Republicans who are upset about this because fundamentally it undermines their power as Congress members to have the authority of appropriations? I
mean, you would think so, wouldn't you? Like, you would think that the relevancy of their institution would not know a party boundary. But, and we do have that quote from Steve Womack, who sort of reasoned it as a pundit, right? Thinking about it from the Democrats' perspective. But outside of, Susan Collins showing concern, which is a perennial, there hasn't really been any kind of concerted pushback. Every Republican voted for a flat, clean, continuing resolution to fund the government in the House. Every Senate Republican has voted for that as well. They don't think there's any need to put any checks on the president's newfound powers to basically make them not a factor in the government as much.
Yeah, and to be clear, Vought is far from done. He's openly trying to get rid of the Department of Education, except he wants to save the bit that tracks student performance because he wants to be able to make race-based arguments for why public schools should not be funded and why charter schools should be funded. And he has to be able to have information about low performance for minority groups to be able to make that pitch.
Well, and here's the thing that's interesting, Brie, regarding that, is that they made a host of firings early on in the administration. And then they found out, oh, wait, our ability to do things that we actually want to do has been compromised by this. So let's hire a bunch of people back. And we've seen reports of hundreds, if not thousands of people who were effectively fired or allowed to take a buyout. And then they hired them right back. Which is the height of inefficiency, number one. But number two, it shows that these threats to, we're going to engage in mass firings and we're going to radically shrink the size of government, they're empty threats in the final analysis, because there are things that they want to do with government. These are not anti-government people. They're activists in a very particular way, right? They want to use the government to expel immigrants and do all of the, the kinds of things that you were talking about with respect to the Department of Education and all of these other things. And they need people to do that. And in addition to just sort of the smooth functioning, the stuff that nobody talks about that's behind the scenes, that just makes the country run. And so I think some Democrats are finally waking up to this idea that these constant threats to bully the federal workforce and to use Democrats kind of their bleeding hearts for federal workers against them are really hollow.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I mean, I think you mentioned earlier, that people might not know all of the number of federal workers that have been fired and how many people have been personally touched by this. Certainly, there are people who don't know. But living in D.C., I have noticed over the last months that when I meet people, I frequently am having these conversations about folks not having jobs, having lost contracts, being in dire straits. Oh, I'm about to move. I talked to people, in the halls of my apartment building. Oh, I'm moving out because I lost my job. I talked to a guy at Run Club last night who said, oh yeah, like I've been unemployed since February. I went on a date this weekend. He lost his contract. Like I over and over and over again, this keeps coming up in my life. Right. So I do think, on one hand, Republicans argue there's too many federal employees. The federal government is just, a welfare system. But the inverse of that is, there are a lot of federal employees and a lot of people who are also voters who are big mad at this. And those people have families, and those people, there's a whole universe of folks that are very directly affected and very aware. And to your point about midterms and longer term consequences, it's hard to imagine that there aren't going to be very significant consequences for Democrats, for Republicans in midterms, even as Democrats are making a sort of inefficient pitch in this moment.
Right.
Before we get off
that. I think we see that in the Virginia governor's race, which is happening this November. Virginia has a lot of federal workers. The Democrat there seems to be doing pretty well. Less so in New Jersey, though. So, I think that it's certainly the case that Washington, D.C. is kind of in a local depression right now. But that doesn't totally resonate to the rest of the country. Not a lot of people, unless you're a political junkie, really know what's going on. And this is a moment where you can actually articulate that.
Well, what about the broader, taking it back to this health care conversation, the premium conversation is wild. The premium conversation is huge.
It's also something that people don't know what's going on, but they're going to find out very soon because the way it works is if you're signing up for Affordable Care Act coverage for next year, you're going to get that letter in the mail in October or maybe early November. In a matter of weeks, you're going to get an email or a registered letter that says your health insurance is going up 75%. And Democrats certainly know that, and Republicans know that. And that's where this conversation is going to start to build. But that was going to build anyway. You don't necessarily have to use this moment to articulate that when there are other things happening that are more appropriate to the circumstance.
Yeah, I'm a little. Why am I conflicted about this? I'm conflicted about this because there's a part of me that thinks, yes, they should not just be talking about premiums, but there's a way to talk about the premiums and the healthcare issues that are more effective than they're already doing them. So, I'm old enough to remember when ACA premiums being high was an effective stalking horse for conservatives, criticizing Democrats in election cycles. And so the idea that something that Republicans have already acknowledged is too high and would be resolved by Medicare for all, but something that Republicans already acknowledge is too high, becoming higher by 75% because of Republican political choices could be, if framed properly, it seems to me, a winner for Democrats.
Oh, I think it will be.
If Democrats are willing to actually also advocate for meaningful healthcare reform in a way that is not so vulnerable to these sort of fluctuations the way the Affordable Care Act is. And this is why, go ahead.
I would say two things. Number one, the only reason we have enhanced ACA subsidies is that Democrats saw that the original Affordable Care Act, the subsidies were insufficient, and they passed. This passed in the American Rescue Plan of 2001. It was extended in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. They only extended it for a short period of time because it cost money, and they didn't want to spend all that money that needed to be spent. And so now we have this cliff here at the end of 2025. So that's number one, is that Democrats have already acknowledged that the ACA is insufficient by virtue of passing these enhanced subsidies, which makes it better. But, there are certainly, and you've talked about them, I'm sure, at length, other ways of delivering health care that aren't subject to these exigencies. So that's number one. Number two, there are ways to talk about both of these things in concert with one another. I mean, among the many programs that this president has cut or withheld or not delivered, even though Congress said he was supposed to, is cancer research, right? I mean, it's basic research into healthcare. There are a number of things that you can talk about with respect to healthcare that play into the very argument of this guy is not honoring the deal that we struck with him. And I'd like to see more of that in the debate as well.
Yeah, and I like to see the Republicans try to frame it as, oh, this is cancer research that's going to benefit immigrants.
Yeah, there you go.
we can't do it because this research might benefit immigrants. I mean, I joke about that, but I am concerned. I think you framed it earlier as sort of Republicans wanting to cut the Department of Education and do all these things to sort of, hurt and malign various groups. I almost think it's more insidious than that. It's not I'm, cartoonishly, evilly wanting to hurt, Black people and immigrants and what have you. I know that I can get all of white America, who's like 70% of the country, let's not forget, and the majority of poor people in this country and the majority of low-income working class people in this country to willingly relinquish their healthcare subsidies, their Medicaid, their whatever it is, if I can frame this as a giveaway to conservatives and to Latinos or minority groups or trans people. And we know this. This is like, the first lesson you learn in your Politics 101 sociology class in college, that this is a strategy that's been used for 100 years.
Right.
The blatantness with which it's being effectuated and the complete and total lack of pushback from Democrats about what is actually being done, even going back to that Hakeem Jeffries clip, it's very frustrating. And I wonder what you make of the fact that the Democrats seem unwilling to use messaging that I remember from the Bernie days polls very well, which is that they are using minority groups to divide us up. I find myself wanting to say it in Bernie's voice because he said it so often. They are dividing us up, but if we stand together, we can have all the things that we want. Yeah. Right? I mean, I think the voters get that, but the Democrats don't seem to be saying that.
I think what you're seeing is the sort of MAGA struggling with the contradictions of their own coalition. So, as you say, they have attracted a number of working class voters, including non-white working class voters, to their various messages. But still, who's really driving the boat economically? It's the Paul Ryan conservatives who basically don't want to spend any money on social spending whatsoever. So they resort to these cultural games, like you're talking about, in order to mask this. And so the contradiction there with respect to healthcare, which is going, if these ACA subsidies go away, it's going to hurt a lot of people in Trump's base, in rural communities. The Medicaid cuts are going to devastate rural hospitals, for example. And they put a pittance of money toward rural hospitals that isn't going to do the job to cover, they're trying to cover $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts with a $50 billion rural hospital fund. It just doesn't work. So you're seeing these contradictions, and these contradictions are exploitable, as you just said, by the opposition party saying, you talk a good game about being a workers' party, but when push comes to shove, you don't want to spend the money. And so you're immiserating workers. And you're also, deregulating all of these things that in ways that harm workers and consumers. And so there is a lot of opportunity to do that. And, I think the Republicans, or the Democrats, I should say, during the Big Beautiful Bill debate, did talk about they're taking food and medicine away from people so they can give wealthy people tax cuts. And that's certainly the case. But I think it's probably bigger than that, and there's probably more to play with there.
Because it's not just I don't. That's a good argument. Like it is true, but it's a slightly different thing than the culture war fight that we're having right now. I mean
what you're saying is they're diverting towards whether it's trans issues or whether it's towards immigrants. to cover for the fact that they don't actually want to help working people.
Yeah, and I bring it up because I have noticed an escalation among Democrats, but among centrist Democrats, in this idea that the way to fight back against this is actually just to abandon those communities. And so a lot of folks probably observed the interview between Ezra Klein and Russel Vought. Klein has really been on a roll these last couple of weeks. Even for him, he's been exceptionally centrist, and by that I mean just conservative, and making the case that Democrats have to make hard choices like running more anti-choice candidates in so-called red states, specifically Kansas, Ohio, and Missouri, which many larger-brained people have pointed out are the exact states where abortion rights ballot measures have been successful and frankly saved Democrats during midterms because people turned out for abortion in a way that they were unwilling to turn out for, say, Kamala Harris. And similarly, there has been this came out in a conversation we just had with Ta-Nehisi Coates, this idea that we need to moderate on trans issues. Now, people are often not very specific about what they mean, and they certainly aren't talking about the 122 anti-trans pieces of legislation that mostly don't focus on sports issues, but focus on education, book bans, and bathroom access and all kinds of things, even though majority of Americans actually support the substantive rights of trans people. So there's this seeming willingness among establishment Democrats to say, let's push back against the Republicans' choice to leverage culture war issues to advance their agenda by trying to out-conservative them on the culture war issues, prior to actually trying, one, advancing genuinely popular economic populist policies like Medicare for all, taxing the rich, minimum wage raise, et cetera. But principally, number two, saying out loud what Republicans are doing. I cannot stress this enough. I forget the name of the woman who's like the messaging maven. I had her on the show. I'm just blocking her name.
Anat Shenker-Korea?
Yes, exactly. Her, exactly. She was on the show, and she, I believe, was the one that was behind the insight that Bernie very much adopted that says, just say it out loud. They are trying to divide us up. They think that you are stupid. I fantasize about this kind of an ad. Imagine if you turn on the TV and there was someone saying, they think you're so dumb. You are so dumb, for real. to think that you're going to give up your Medicaid because of some immigrant somewhere? Like, if you want to figure out, like, they think you're so dumb that you're going to get rid of public education so that every single one of you has to put your money together to pay for your kid to go to some version of paid private school.
Yeah.
Because what? They're going to learn something that you don't approve of in the classroom? They think that you are so dumb that they're going to send their kids to college and tell you that your kids shouldn't have the same opportunity because you're too poor to pay for it, and they're going to cut funding to public institutions? They think you're that stupid? Are you? But the Democrats do seem to believe that the public is that stupid, such that they won't even put the argument to them or say openly what the Republicans are doing. They're just like, well, let me try to be Republican too.
I think what you see, even though it's a different thing, what you see with the decision to foreground healthcare in this shutdown debate is a function of that same pathology. It's basically says, we're not trusted on anything. The public doesn't like us at all. They really only like us on healthcare. Let's not talk about anything but healthcare, and then everybody will like us. And that's basically the strategy that they've trotted out. And, I would say that a strategy that you articulate here that calls out exactly what is happening as it is happening is a way to get out of this box where you say, well, we're not trusted on immigration. We're not trusted on crime. We're not trusted on this. We're not trusted on that. We're not going to fight back and give our view on the subject, but we're just going to retreat that ground. And pretty much you're retreating and retreating. And you're just going to this small disc. That's the only place that you can stand. And you've sawed off the interests of everybody who's part of your coalition. And I think that's really, really dangerous as a political party.
Yeah, it's like they saw first they came for the communists and I did nothing because I was not a communist poem. And they were like, okay, First, I came for the communists, and I said, I'm also going to be anti-communist because we'll secretly save the communists by being anti-communist first. I mean, literally, I know I have been rage tweeting about this for the last 24 hours on Twitter, so I'm sorry, this is a bit of a preoccupation. But in his discussion with Ta-Nehisi Coates,
I think that in losing as badly as we have imperiled trans people terribly.
Yes.
Politics is for power.
Joe Biden did that.
I think it means exploring things that are uncomfortable and being pretty disciplined in a way maybe I haven't been about separating the question of what I believe from what I believe will win power. Because I currently think that the cost of losing power is horrifying and dangerous, and we can't keep doing it. So that's...
Ezra Klein literally makes the case that trans people are very vulnerable right now under Donald Trump, and that to stop trans people from being vulnerable, Democrats should have ceded ground on trans issues, which again, I think people need to be specific about what they're talking about. If they're talking very narrowly about the issue of competitive sports and sex-segregated sports and trans competition, that's one thing. But trans issues ignores, again, the overwhelming majority of the anti-trans legislation that goes to broader civil rights concerns. But his argument is like, we've got to throw them under the bus first to avoid them being vulnerable. And at that point, if you just have two sort of substantively similar parties, then what are we really doing? And what's so frustrating about that is it doesn't even occur to him that there were other off-ramps. And Ta-Nehisi Coates very gently, maybe too gently, tries to say, okay, but there's a world where Kamala would have won if we had just had a primary, if they hadn't pushed Biden on us into the last minute, and we could have had a real Democratic primary. Or the Democrats could have won if they had distanced themselves from Trump's policy, from Biden's policy on Gaza. I mean, Gaza is the number one issue for Biden 2020 voters that did not vote for Kamala Harris. And so why are you so eager to jump to the conclusion that you have to out conservatives before you've even tried any of these alternatives? And last thing I was going to say in this is, there's a world, when I'm imagining fantasy ads, there's a world where Democrats get on TV and say, Republicans want to defund everything except for the genocide in Gaza.
Right.
And to put side by side how much they've spent on foreign wars versus how much they're unwilling to spend on education or healthcare, blah, 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 blah. And that argument is completely unavailable to Democrats because they have chosen, as they did in the 2024 election, to prioritize litigating Netanyahu's war in Gaza, Israel's war in Gaza, over actually winning, which gives them a huge credibility issue as they're now trying to say that they're the resistance party.
It's like
holding off fascism.
The flip side of the argument of, well, we need to moderate on trans issues so we can win, and then we can do a better trans policy than the Republicans. That doesn't translate to Gaza. They can't moderate from their very Israel right or wrong only stance. They can't go to the popular thing, which in America in 2025 is very anti the Israeli government. They can't moderate so they can get the better policy and so they can win. The winning argument only goes one way. But I will just say one more thing. You have been paid to be a political strategist, or at least been paid by a campaign. I have not.
Well,
I mean,
I've been paid to be a national press secretary, who I really have to stress nobody listened to. I had absolutely zero input into any of the messaging outside of the Bernie podcast.
Here's my point.
I wish that I had, but go ahead.
Here's my point. I have not been paid, and I have no interest in doing free labor for the Democratic Party. Sure. And I think it's a real danger that people who are not paid political strategists spend all their time thinking and acting like paid political strategists rather than telling the truth. And I think we need a lot more truth in our politics. And I'm not a personal super PAC for the Democratic Party. I'm just going to tell you what's happening. And what's clearly happening is that, in this government shutdown situation, we're already there. And I think people appreciate more. My personal view is people appreciate the truth more than these endless amounts of positioning and political strategic thinking. But for me, I'm not getting paid, so I'm just going to tell the truth.
Yeah, it's interesting that even that you say that, because you're right. I do feel, and I feel conflicted about this, but I do feel, funnily enough, that despite I'm simultaneously framed as like evil, responsible for Trump being elected. Because I told people not to vote for him because I said, it is a vote for genocide, and they have the option just to not support a genocide. I'm not getting their hand on that, but that is the truth of the matter. And on the other hand, some people in my own audience are like, why do you even care what the Democrats do or say, or whether they're successful? We're over it. We're not voting for them. And you're right. I am, in the context of this episode and in many other contexts. I recently had a conversation with Antonio Delgado, Lieutenant Governor of New York, who's running for governor, about how I think his messaging could improve to make him more amenable to progressives. It is like, why am I doing this? Like, because I guess on some emotional level, like, even though I don't believe the Democratic Party is reformable, I think part of me making the argument for why I don't think it's reformable is to lay out, well, this is what they could be doing and saying, and they're choosing not to.
And that's fine.
And that gap is why, go ahead.
It's fine that you want to do that. And I think anybody who thinks the country can be better managed and we can have broadly shared prosperity and a better country can make those arguments. And if those arguments go to messaging, then so be it. What I'm saying is I think we've lost the plot to some degree where all we're talking about messaging and we leave out our own ideals and beliefs. And I think maybe, a good message is, this is what I believe.
Yeah, it's so interesting. This has echoes also of that Coates-Klein conversation, because at some point, Coates asks Klein, like, what do you think your role is, in this space as a journalist or whatever? And Klein responds that he doesn't really know. And Coates clearly, I don't know if he says so expressly, but he clearly believes he has a moral role. And he says that my role is to tell the truth. Right. And he says, I'm not naive. I understand that from a political perspective, there are things that I believe to be true that aren't maybe politically popular in polls. Right. And he raises as an example, FDR may have had to, I don't know, but maybe he really did have to throw Black people under the bus in order to pass the New Deal policy.
To get it past the Southern Democrats, yes.
Exactly. But he says if I were alive during that time, it would have been my job to argue that he shouldn't do those things and that was morally irresponsible to do those things. Right. And Ezra Klein clearly disagrees. But what's really pernicious about that, so Coates says he's going to take a moral position. Ezra says he doesn't really care about the moral position. He's going to take the political position. But I would put to both of them, are you both buying into the premise prematurely that that's what the FDR has to do, especially in a world where we're not even talking about FDR passing something actually really beneficial and good that maybe is worth a bargain. We're talking about an extension on ACA subsidies on a healthcare policy that itself was a Republican plan and slapdash and da-da-da-da. And you also haven't availed yourself of all of these other popular policies that could get your party behind you. And this is what's so frustrating. I'm watching Donald Trump tweet out a clip of Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries giving a press conference.
Look, guys, there's no way to sugarcoat it. Nobody likes Democrats anymore. We have no voters left because of all of our woke trans bullshit.
Where it's a deep fake and they're saying things that they obviously didn't say. And also they've put a sombrero and a mustache on Hakeem Jeffries.
Right.
It's, it's racist. It's a lie. It's beneath the dignity of the office, if you care about that sort of thing at this point. All of that is true. But what's amazing is that's not going to break through. Nobody even cares anymore. Because Republicans are making their own news cycle. They're feeding their own base. Right. They've got people excited. They're clearly doing something. Donald Trump got elected and he's doing what his people want him to do. Biden had a trifecta and acted like he was in punishment, like someone else was his boss. Sorry, what's his name? West Virginia.
Joe Manchin, yeah.
Like Joe Manchin was his boss, was the real Joe who was president of the United States for the first 2 years of his term.
Yeah.
And I cannot tolerate, I cannot handle that Donald Trump does cruel and actually unpopular things and still manage to seem more trusted on a number of issues. Because Democrats are so afraid of their shadow that they're unwilling to be aggressive about popular things.
Yeah.
And then we're told that we should accept prematurely that we should be on the back foot of our morals and values without ever having tried what it looks like for a Democratic Party to be aggressive on something like not just healthcare reform, but Medicare for all,
and
for
I do,
ending the genocide. Yeah, go ahead.
And I do think part of the problem is that this endless positioning to say this is where Democrats need to be in order to capture X slice of the electorate, et cetera, it feeds into what essentially is the one argument that Republicans make about Democrats, which is that they're spineless, weak, and have no principles. So all you're doing is proving the Republicans right when you consume yourself with these arguments about political positioning. And instead of just saying, I think every American should have health care as a basic human right. I think every American should have a living wage if they work. To be able to provide for themselves and their family.
Yes. I think they should be able to afford an apartment. And the last thing I'll say on this is, especially in the wake of Zohran Mamdani, leaning into not just a popular position like Free Palestine, but globalize the intifada. That man won. I know he's backtracking now. The audience, don't come at me. You know that I've criticized him for the backtracking. You know that I know. That being said, he won the primary not having backtracked on globalize the intifada.
Right.
And in fact, I would argue that it galvanized support around him because people saw how he was getting railroaded on Israel by a bunch of bad faith actors who, despite being the political minority in this country, thought that they could make this a negative issue for him and said, I trust this man 100% more because he went 10 toes down on something that he really didn't have to go 10 toes down on. And I trust his commitment to all of the other things that he stands for.
Right.
In the wake of that, to see how invigorating it is among your base and how much political power comes in just standing with your base, and to see that effectuated with Zohran Mamdani and to see it effectuated with Donald Trump in an evil way, but still.
Right.
And to say, no, the path forward is to equivocate, is to somehow think you're going to gain a single conservative vote by promising that you're more hardcore on immigration or police than Donald Trump. And to see the polling. So, go ahead.
And what Mamdani did is a version of what you were talking about, because he was laser focused on affordability. The fact that you can't make a living in New York City, it's hard to survive as a middle-class person in New York City, as his main issue. And basically implicitly and sometimes explicitly saying they're trying to divide you on all these other issues.
Yes.
Because what we're actually talking about is how to make it in New York City and how to make this city welcoming to everybody, no matter if you're rich or poor. So that, I think, is the key issue, is that he had first principles that he spoke from.
Yes, that was what was at the core of that. Like, I'm not going to Tel Aviv thing during the debate, right? When they ask him what his first trip is going to be, it's not just
he's like, I'm a New Yorker. Why do I have to go to Tel Aviv? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he hit them with the Joy Bear. So what? Who cares? So what? Globalize the intifada. So what? Who cares? We're talking about affordability here. Do you know what I mean? Right. And people got that. People understood New Yorkers aren't stupid. Americans aren't stupid. But the Democratic Party surely is making them as acting like they are. That being said, okay, as we wrap up here, David.
Yeah.
What do we think is going to happen? I mean, people are going to be listening to this on Thursday. You've had this like stutter step from Chuck Schumer already, where he, floated the idea of a compromise and then got whipped back into shape by his party. People like Jasmine Crockett are currently tweeting out that Republicans have left on some like furlough to North Carolina. What's that about? They're not even in town?
They're not in town. Basically, they have, the House has already passed its bill, which is a 7-week continuing resolution. And they're saying, look, take it or leave it. Senate, so we're out of town. So they're not even there, and Democrats are back in town. I guess they tried to gavel
taking photos on the congressional steps. The Democrats are
right.
Yeah.
So that doesn't look great, but all of this is just sort of, there's going to be this back and forth positioning. I think it's going to be a very long shutdown because there's no real continuity on what people want. It's certainly possible that some Senate Democrats will get spooked and take like a promise to talk later about healthcare subsidies as enough of a fig leaf to do a short-term continuing resolution, and then maybe we go through this all over again. That I certainly think that's possible, but I tend to think that there's enough anger in the base, and that sort of the dividing line in Democratic politics right now is a little less about ideology and a little more about, are you going to give a damn to fight for me or not?
Yeah.
That I think that will keep leaders in line, that knowing that they have to be on the right side of that line and actually give a damn enough to fight. And so I tend to think this is going to be long, but I've certainly been wrong before, and maybe we'll see the same old games.
Yeah. I have sort of mixed feelings. I think what you said is true, that the sort of dividing line is between fighters and non-fighters. There's a part of me that is afraid that is true, and there's a part of me that's worried about that. Here's why.
Okay.
As the oligarchy tour was happening, I saw a lot of establishment Democrats intentionally make the case that it is good because it shows a fight, but it's bad because of the substance of it. And I see that there's a window to take advantage of being seen as a fighter, which of course is also easy to do when you're relatively easy to do when you're completely out of power and nothing you argue for is going to happen anyway. So you can promise the moon and the stars. The same way you get a lot more chatter about Medicare for all.
That's why the House Democrats have an easier job, right? They can just say no because they don't have the leverage. The Senate Democrats are the ones who have the leverage.
Yeah. So I know you're seeing some rhetorical space open up where Ossoff and some others have been sounding really good. Mm-hmm. And I hope that they mean it. But there is this other part of me that's like, in the same way that the 2020 field realized they had to start a sort of Medicare for all who want it vibes, that they're realizing that if you're a young Democrat, meaning a Democrat under the age of 60, and you say, it's not about left, right, it's about top down. Wealth has been aggregating among the very top, and it's not fair. We need politics for working people. We got to focus on kitchen table issues and the economy, and there's an affordability crisis. Everything I said is true, and I agree with. But everything I said is also potentially just vibes based.
Yeah, the question is, what do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by that? What is a top-down politics that invites working people into the table? Because everybody from every part of the Democratic coalition agrees with what you just said. So the question is, what does that mean? How do you operationalize that? And I think there are some in maybe the Progressive Caucus that are actually thinking about what that means in a real sense to create actual legislation that that. Yes, Greg Casar. I did a big profile of Greg Casar, and they're putting together like actual bills that put working people first. He has this thing called the construction site test, where if he can't explain an issue to somebody working on a construction site, then it shouldn't be at the top of their agenda, which I think is good. So it means expanding Social Security. It means making prescription drug prices the same price here that they pay in Canada. It's things of that nature. Maybe, and I think it's Medicare for all, I mean, I think that's a pretty easy thing for a construction site worker to understand. I want to say one more thing here, which is that, we've talked about how the Senate Democrats have leverage. It's important to understand that leverage is given to them by Republicans, and Republicans have every ability to solve this problem themselves. All they have to do is end the filibuster, break a filibuster, end the Senate, change the Senate rules, which they have done repeatedly this year when things, the Senate Democrats have created problems for them that were inconvenient. Just last week, Senate Republicans changed the rules so that instead of having to confirm one nominee at a time, they could bulk confirm dozens of nominees at the same time, thereby saving time on the Senate floor. They just did that.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be a remedial student here, but what do you mean they just changed the rules? Because I'm sorry, we just spent 4 years or at least 2 years being told that Joe Biden with his trifecta could not do anything because there was some parliamentarian somewhere.
Exactly. So they overruled the parliamentarian. That's what they did to change the rules right there. They overruled the parliamentarian.
Just last week, the Republicans did what could not be done.
They
overruled the parliamentarian.
They engaged in what is called the nuclear option, which Democrats have done, by the way, before by lowering the threshold. It used to be 60 votes to pass to confirm an executive branch nominee. In 2013, under Harry Reid, the Democrats lowered that to 50. They did that through a process which is well known, which could be used to end the filibuster. And my view, personally, even though it would be bad politically and bad for policy in the short term, that ending the filibuster and restoring majority rule to the Congress would actually be a very, very good thing for Democrats and for small d Democratic accountability. So that when somebody gets into office saying, I'm going to pass 1, 2, 3, and 4, they can't point to some fucking rule book somewhere that says I'm not allowed to pass 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I think, from my view, the optimal outcome, maybe in some respects, would be, you want to fund the government, Senate Republicans? Do it yourself. Change the rules. Get it done. Otherwise, we're not playing that game.
Amen, brother. Amen. You got me jazzed up. I'm ready to go. Amen. Okay, to that and to that point, like, look, nobody wants everyone to lose their jobs and to have this crisis, and nobody, obviously, in an ideal world, nobody wants it. Mm-hmm. But there is a part of me that, to your point, is like, this is like, what do they call it in psychology? Like natural consequences. Right. Like you don't learn a lesson unless you have natural consequences for your behavior.
I mean, to me, it's that if the actual federal workers who would be denied paychecks are telling you, deny my paycheck because this system right now is unsustainable, then you deny the paycheck. I mean, then what you do is you listen to the workers who are most prominently affected by this. And so to me, that's what this fight is about. This fight is about Congress is losing their credibility and power as an institution, and they need to get it back, and they need to put the rules in place to get it back. And if and failing that, Republicans can fix this problem on their own and make it much easier in the future for presidents to pass their agendas.
Yeah, but and this is my argument, which maybe is too cynical by half for some people, but that the reason that Democrats won't do that and why that conversation was a complete non-starter during the Biden administration was because they benefit enormously from being able to pretend that there's some procedural reason why they couldn't pass their 100%, agenda.
And that's why I want to do it. We need to end the artifice. One of the reasons why I think people are very cynical about politics is because they're promised the moon and given a ham sandwich. And we need to take away these structures that enable that to happen.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Argentina and Milei and how when he won, I remember being at Rising, obviously with a libertarian co-host, and we had, I think, Liz Wolfe, another libertarian, on to do this segment, and they were over the moon, and they were doing a victory lap, and they were telling me and the audience that we're about to have a libertarian fever dream, and we're going to all learn how good libertarianism is. And I said, okay, let's check back in after he's been in power for a while.
What happened this week? What went down?
Americans are literally bailing them out. And I
not only are we bailing them out, but we are bailing out a country that is then delivering soybeans to China at the expense of our own farmers, who then we are also bailing out with tariff money. So I don't know if you can make that make sense, but we are basically bailing out the country that is forcing us to do its second bailout.
Well, they're not going to have to make it make sense because I checked. I mean, something might happen after we record this, but they have done no follow-up coverage on this. And when I was still at Rising, the country was already in poverty and immiseration, and I wanted to do a segment on that. Mm-hmm. And they declined. I kept asking, and it somehow magically never ended up back on the schedule every day. So
I don't want to get into your career problems.
My personal abuse. No worries, but that's all just to say, like, there might not be any accountability at that particular news organization, but there could be accountability the way that, we're all, those of us with eyes who can see what the end point of malaise politics has led. And I hate what the people of Argentina are going through. I would hate for the people of America to have to go through similar types of economic immiseration. But here we are. And maybe that's what it takes for the public to finally realize, oh, yeah, maybe government is doing a couple of good things.
I mean, what you're talking about with respect to Argentina is that the guy said he was going to do these things, and then he did them. And then the public can actually see, oh, this is better for my life or not better for my life, and I can make changes to put somebody else in power who will actually do something that I support and prefer. And I'd like to see that kind of accountability in the United States.
Yeah. Well, look, David, I always so appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule running the amazing American Prospect, without which I would be deeply ignorant and know nothing. I strongly recommend everybody read your latest from yesterday, titled "The Government Has Been Shut Down for Months. Today is the day we stop pretending that it is not." And I also recommend people get into this Russel Vought piece in the New York Times, because I mean, this man is a supervillain that's not going anywhere, who very much has a clear agenda for where the country is going, and it informs, I think, your piece very nicely. Tell folks where to find more of you and your work at the American Prospect and beyond.
Sure. We're at prospect.org. You can find me on social media at Dayen, Dayen. And I also, since we're in the podcast world right here, I do a podcast that I co-host with Matt Stoller called Organize Money. And you can find that at organizemoney.fm. In fact, our podcast this week is about Argentina. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check that out.
I will definitely be tuning in. Matt was on the podcast just this past Thursday. So if listeners haven't listened to that, they should check that out. Or sorry, this past Monday. We're recording this on a Tuesday. Just yesterday. Yesterday he was on the podcast. Right. So you can find that episode with Matt Stoller and Alvaro Bedoya, who's a former FTC commissioner who was fired by Donald Trump, at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. You can get an additional Monday episode every week by subscribing to Patreon and supporting independent media. So go to the American Prospect, go to Bad Faith. Thank you for listening to this episode. As always, take care of yourselves and keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.